Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream Podcast,
where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media.
I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Welcome back to the New Mainstream Podcast. I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and today we have an exciting guest joining us, Cairo Marsh, founder and executive partner at Relativ, marketing consultancy that's redefining how brands connect with their customers. Cairo has extensive experience in digital and data-driven marketing. Thrilled to have him on and dive into insights. Cairo, welcome to the show.
Mario, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of the show. I like what you do, and I appreciate the opportunity and the time.
Yeah, appreciate it when you booked it. So we're recording on November 6th. I didn't realize, I didn't even look at the date, right? So we were having a conversation about that. It's interesting day to record a podcast.
Yeah, no, obviously, and everyone who's listening may have a range of politics, and that's all good. Some people are probably happy.
Yeah.
Some people are probably a little bit feeling differently. But I think it's, to me, like I just think it's a reminder either way of what you feel is that, you know, we all have missions in life. We all have things we're trying to do, things that we believe in. Some of that manifests in what I do from a career and business perspective. But it's just a reminder to keep at it. It's a reminder to try to make the impact that I'm trying to make. And I think regardless of your politics, I think it's really a reminder to pursue your dreams and your goals and your positive contribution.
That's 100% true. And I think that's a great segue to dive a little bit about your career journey. What makes you tick? I mean, like I mentioned in the intro, you have an impressive career. I know you're in New York now, but we're also running your business in Japan, and would love to have you share with our listeners a little bit about what brought you to Tokyo, how your journey led to founding Relativ.
Absolutely. And just to start, so I'm a native New Yorker, very, very proud of that. I'm from the Bronx, which even, you know how New York is, we got a little borough, so you got to claim your borough, proud of where I'm from. Basically, grew up here, started my career in New York, worked in advertising for about 15 years or so in New York before going out to Japan. Um, my background as a marketer has always been in sort of consumer insights, data, trying to find solutions versus sort of traditional advertising. And I was able to leverage that in a really positive way in Japan. Like Japan has always been a more traditional advertising market. So where you're doing broadcast and celebrity driven marketing. And when I got out there, it was really the start of digital, if you will, in terms of, okay, now we have websites, we have databases, what are we going to do with them? And so because I came from a non-traditional background, it was an opportunity, even though I was outside the culture, even though I was outside the language, even at that time, it was really an opportunity to contribute because I brought a skill set that was a little bit unique in the market at the time. And obviously I've been out there 15 years and it's been good. It's been good.
What was the impetus for you to go to Japan? Like, what was it a job
Yeah.
opportunity? Were you
I
what
think
was that?
it was personal. Like, so I was working for an agency in New York, right? And I was things that sort of flattened out where not in a bad way. I was doing well. I was on the management committee in New York and things like that. But I wasn't going to grow. I wasn't going to get promoted for the next 3 years, right? You're sort of at that plateau point where you've got to wait. The people in front of you, what are you going to do? And when I felt that way, I'm like, well, if I can't grow professionally, maybe I can grow personally. And I had been out to Japan a couple of years earlier for a wedding. A friend of mine got married out there. I found it fascinating. I'm not going to tell you I love it. It was just so culturally, the energy was so different. It was just sort of plays in the back of your mind when you're trying to figure this thing out. Like, how does it work? How do people move and interact in that sort of way? And I made a couple of friends there that I was, wanted to keep up with, and I was at least communicating with via email or Skype at the time or whatever it was. And it really just seemed like a place that I could make a go of it. So I ended up going back out there before I moved there on a vacation. And I stayed out there a couple of weeks. And that really sort of sealed the deal. I met some people working in international advertising. They enjoyed it. And it just sort of fit, sort of clicked, and it felt right, you know?
That's cool. Yeah, I love that. I mean, and it's an interesting choice because it's like you mentioned, culturally, it's so different. I'm curious, what impact does that have on you creatively to be in a completely different cultural milieu? Like, I'm curious, how does that help or hurt you as a marketer?
As a human being and also as a business person, I think it's been incredibly helpful because in any, I don't care what you do, I don't care what profession you have. After a while, you know how to play the game. I don't care if
Mm,
you're working at McDonald's. I don't care if you're working at the post office. I don't care if you're working at the bank. There's a system after a while, and you know that system really well. That's true culturally as well. So as a marketing guy in New York, I knew the game. You know how to present. You sort of be a little entertaining. These sort of things. You go to Japan, they don't play that game. Like all the tools and skill sets that I thought I had didn't work. I go up in the meeting, I tell a joke, everyone's looking at me stone faced. And I'm like, oh, if you take all my tools away, you take all the way I've learned to play the game, what do I have left? Am I really
right.
good at this or am I a system player? And so I think being in that context sort of forced me to go, how do I get good at this? What do I actually know? How do I connect outside of the gimmicks, if you will, that I've always used to connect with in New York? And that was really personal growth. And it's I'm still probably growing through that because I always say Japan's a bit like an onion. You think you understand it and you go, oh, there's another layer. Now I get it. There's another layer. You keep digging, there's always another layer to it. And that's the beautiful part of it. You can never really get to the middle.
That's cool. And I think of sports. I mean, because World Series, I guess, is top of mind. Sorry to bring that up. I'm assuming you're a Yankees fan.
I am from the Bronx. Yeah. Are you LA? LA took it this year. And honestly,
Yeah.
classic World Series. So I'm never mad at the Dodgers yet.
No, it was great. But so, thinking about your analogy in terms of moving to another culture and knowing the tools and the system, I feel like some of the most elite sports athletes do that as well, right? Like whether it's basketball, maybe they're learning soccer and it's a completely, now they're no longer good, but when they start to learn those skills and they bring it back, like it just makes you a better athlete, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like even within a sport, they talk about like you play old school LA playing the triangle versus playing in a different system. Players have to adjust their game for different systems, and that's really honestly that's really how I felt being in Japan. It says, okay, how do I adjust because my style of the game doesn't really work here, but I still feel like I'm good at this. But what does that mean now?
Right, right. And I think this gets into a little bit of what I want to talk about in terms of one of the key concepts of your company, relative relationship design.
Yeah,
Um, can you explain like what is relationship design, and is it related to what we're talking about here in terms
mm,
of um, in terms of different cultures, and how does it
sure.
help, foster brand like long-term connections with customers?
Sure. Well, let me see where to start with that. Like, I don't think it's not related necessarily to a intercultural dynamic. That's not the
Mm,
driver of it. But I do think it's based on a lot of the lessons I've had in my life across cultures, from whether that's in the Bronx or in Tokyo or wherever. It's really around a principle that says, when are we at our best, right? And I think we're at our best when we are in a place where we feel safe, where we feel supported, where we feel nurtured, et cetera. And that's true as it applies to commercial business. It's not just about your personal well development or whatever. But where am I going to spend my money freely? With brands I know I can trust, with people I feel that support me, where I get that energy back. So when we look at marketing, a lot of marketing tends to be very uh, uh, um, not traditional. It's transactional. Very.
yeah.
What can I get done today? And that's cool. And you can make money off that today. Or you can think about obviously surviving and growing and making money today, but also how do I cultivate a dynamic or a culture between me and my consumers that allows them to feel safe and supported, where they're going to spend more freely with me, where they're going to be more comfortable engaging with me in an unprompted way. So relationship design is about looking for any given brand. What are the levers that create that culture between you and your consumers?
What's like? I have some brands in mind from your perspective. Like when you are working with a company, or maybe you're even working with some companies, who's doing relationship design right? Like who would you point to and say, hey, here's the gold standard of relationship design or relationship marketing?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think it varies. I think it, in my observation, I think it happens more in niches versus holistically. You know, I
Hmm.
think in niches, you can say certain things that Nike does with athletes is really good, right? Because what Nike does, they don't just give you sneakers and sell them to you. They build a whole ecosystem of support around this idea of athleticism, which then makes people feel like, as an athlete, as someone who wants to be an athlete, you're tapping into a brand that's really around your beliefs and your desires. I don't know if you could say that Nike does that holistically through all different types of touch points and engagement, but I think that at some level they do. What I personally think in the example I usually point to, I point to local businesses because I think that there's a lot that large businesses can learn from local businesses around that. If I'm running my local bodega here in the Bronx, or if I'm running a local store in Nebraska or a local izakaya in Tokyo, I have to understand my consumers and make them feel real comfortable so that they come back. They don't come back for the brand. They don't come back for the promotions. Even they come back because they know when they walk in that store that I'm going to look out for them. They know that me as a proprietor, I create a comfortable environment for that consumer. Now, I think what happens is as businesses grow, the person in charge of these sort of systems don't ever see their customers. So customers become numbers. So if you're a marketing manager at a global company, your sense or your feel or your consideration for people is by almost necessity and design a bit remote. And I don't care how good the organization is, it tends to be that way. When we talk about relationship design with our clients as well, okay, great. You can't do that in the same way that a corner store would, but how do you create systems where your marketing managers or your customer service managers or your e-commerce managers are getting feedback in a dynamic sense so that they can react to that? And how are you, what type of information are you collecting on your consumers besides sort of that behavioral and demographic data that allows you to understand where they perceive the relationship with you, why they perceive it, and how you can begin to close those gaps. So it's trying to take principles of local business and applying that to larger businesses at scale in a little bit more, I say dynamic way, because it's not something where just one guy can control that. You have to have systems around the organization to do that.
I'm thinking about a recent example, and I don't want to say this is relationship design because um, I'm just trying to see. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. So Starbucks has their new CEO, right? They're trying to get back to basics. I think what he's saying is trying to get back to relationship design. One of the things he's implementing, this is a tactic, you know, right now, if you go to Starbucks, they ask you your name, they type your name, and then they print a sticker. They're going to do away with that whole sticker machine. I don't know if you've read this, and they're going to go back to the Sharpie. Is that an example? I mean, this is a giant company. Are they trying to bring back like that sense of like, okay, there's an actual person writing on my cup now?
100%. I think that's part of it. I think that's a great way to do it because to me, if you're retail, your brand is in the store. And a lot of times we forget that, right? It's Starbucks or McDonald's. Your brand is in the store and who people are interacting with. I think one of the things that, Starbucks does in a really nice way sometimes, not only do they put your name on the cup, sometimes like, the barista will draw a little picture or add something personal to it, right? Which is really nice. And I think that in principle of relationship design, it's not just saying that you should write on the cups. I think it's also empowering the people in the store, give them a degree of flexibility to how they treat people as individuals. You can't do it from headquarters, but you can create systems that allow in the store a certain amount of autonomy around some of these decisions.
Right, right, yeah. And then another example I'm thinking of, I don't know if you're familiar with Trader Joe's because I think that's a West Coast thing, but they're big on. Are there now? Okay, yeah, yeah. So they're big. You know, when you go to a Trader Joe's, um, the cashiers are always having a conversation about you with your with what you're buying, which feels weird at first. If you go
Yep.
to like, a big grocer, they just kind of check out your bag. But if you go to Trader Joe's and you buy pasta and wine, they're like, "Oh, you're gonna have a date night at home," and you're like maybe I don't know, but it starts to build that relationship.
Yeah, no, because you want to connect with the person that you're dealing with. You don't want a logo's a logo. A human being's a human being, and the reason why relationship design is so important is that we believe, and I think everyone believes this. We don't always act this way in business. Is that the fundamental need for human connections is so core to who we are. When you create that sense of connection and trust, things just open up in a different way. The only thing that, like, sometimes these companies have to be careful of is that you can't fake it, right? And that's what I mean about you have to give a degree of autonomy in local
Mm.
environments for that, because we all know when someone's reading off the script, even if it's with a smile and they read it real well. You really want to have people being empowered in the store to represent the brand in the right way.
And so, intuitively, I think I'm getting a sense of it, of relationship design, and that's important. I feel like as a society, and I mean society, I mean America, we're moving towards that way. You mentioned earlier that Japan, when you first went there, was more kind of traditional marketing, just like advertising, celebrity. Where is Japan at with relationship design? Are they embracing that, or and if so, how does it manifest itself there?
Absolutely. So Japan is very fascinating as a service culture. I'm a screw this up, and someone will probably one of my Japanese friends will listen to this or watch this and call me out for being an idiot. But there's cultural principles like omotenashi, which is a principle really of welcoming and servicing people. Um, in Japan. So when you go to a store or a shop, the service level is epic. It's absolutely epic. I don't care. Think of the best service you can think of in the U.S. Maybe Trader Joe's, maybe someone else. That's considered rude in Japan. Like, so the amount of care that is given at any point of interaction is is amazing. What I think Japan sometimes struggles at is when you take that and you try to build that into, okay, well, how will I treat people via email marketing? How will I treat people through the web experience? Because relationship design is not just about in store. That's a touch point, but all the touch points is where you really have to bake that in, that sense of consideration, that sense of I'm here for you and how we speak. And I think if Japan struggles, it's not on the front lines. It's really in taking a digital experience and making it sort of surrounded around the consumer. It just, and it's not a criticism of Japan, but Japan's traditional weak point, they've had all the technology in the world, best technology, better than the US for years. The weak spot was around user experience and user experience
Mm.
design and how you actually customize it around that. I think Japan is starting to catch up in that regard, but that's still a bit of a growth area, I think.
What why do you think that? Because to me, that's a little bit incongruous, right? You would think like if they're paying such attention from a person to person standpoint about experience, why has and they're leaders in technology, why hasn't that those principles extended itself into a digital world, from your
Yeah,
opinion?
honestly, that's a hard question. Like, I'll tell you, I think the roots are in a couple of different things. One is this, is my opinion,
Yeah.
validated. One is in the U.S. in the, let's say, 80s and 90s. It was a big database marketing era, right? We take all this data, we understand customer profiles, and okay, you get this offer via direct mail, or you get this offer. Like, data driven marketing and direct marketing and database marketing was massive here then. Not so much in Japan, and a lot of that had to do with Japanese privacy laws and what data you can collect and what data you can use. So that era where we're in the U.S. figuring out how to customize messages and look at people as individuals in this sort of principle and through this lens of data didn't start to take root in Japan until 2010, which is honestly one of the advantages that I brought when I came to the market, because I had that already as a background, and Japan
you,
didn't
you
have
were
that
ahead of the
background.
game.
Yeah, because Japanese. basically, as it applies to direct marketing, Japanese laws sort of prohibited that level of data collection and usage of data. Therefore, direct marketing was only based on geography. So if you live in the zip code, everyone gets that. But there's no real insight that underpinned any of that. So when the digital age sort of struck, and everyone's like, okay, great, now we can do more. We can look at, even not identifiable data, but looking at patterns and trends and still clustering people. It was a new thing. And so I think that's why Japan has traditionally lagged because they didn't have that personalized data that would apply to some of those design decisions.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And it's also thinking about that out loud. It's like, and I'm totally generalizing here, right?
Yeah.
But it sounds like Japan has the in-person experience down, customer service, um, and maybe has some opportunities to work on the digital side. America, our service isn't great if I think about it. I mean, I gave you some examples, but
No, it's not.
when it when it comes to in person, it's pretty bad, But we have the digital thing down on lock, and I wonder what that says about us culturally, right? Like,
It probably says a lot. Like, we've all had that experience where you walked into the store and asked for help, and the person working at the store looked at you like you were bothering them, right? And they're like, "What? What do you need?" Like, don't you work here? Like, like that would that would never happen in Japan. They're there for a reason, right?
yeah,
The U.S. is very interesting. I think around that, and I think the it's really interesting. This is just again my whatever non scientific opinion. I think the U.S. culture of everybody for themselves in a lot of ways very it creates a great deal of entrepreneurialism, creates a great deal of freedom and aggressiveness, which I think can be good and can be dynamic, which is why the U.S. leads in so many industries. But at the same time, it creates also a culture of isolationism and suspicion that doesn't create a sense of how do we all work through this together and we need to be here for each other. Part of the principle that again, as I believe in, is in our through our company relative, is that the more that we believe in each other, the more that we trust each other, we can just be our best. The less I'm looking over my shoulder, the more I'm looking forward. And I think that as the U.S. progresses, I think growth is different. Sorry, this is a little bit of a rant. I think
no, no,
going
I love
forward,
this. That's what it's a podcast are
yeah,
for. Yeah, I love it.
I think going forward, growth is different. Historically, growth was about expansion. It was like, hey, we conquer new markets, we conquer new places, we colonize new areas, right? And until we get to Mars, that's off the table. There's no more things to colonize on this planet. There's no more things to conquer. I think growth today is through service, is through value creation, where we help each other more to free up capacity. But that requires a degree of trust and relationships to do it. That's just that like so that's sort of the operating principle in which we believe and how we look at business is that real growth is going to come from that in a sustainable way because there are no new markets to conquer in that sort of
Mm.
50-year-old paradigm, if you will.
Yeah, no, I love that. I guess taking a turn a little bit, although this feels related, like I want to talk a little bit about challenger brands, right? So, I think I read something, about Liquid Death. That's a big challenger brand going from underdogs to, one of the biggest now water brands. Like from your perspective, like what can other businesses, especially smaller ones, right? Like Liquid Death started as a smaller one. Learn from these brands and in terms of building these strong customer relationships that we're talking about.
So one of the things that I really, really like about Liquid Death is that they are unabashedly themselves, and
Yeah.
I think you can't build a relationship with anyone if you don't know who you are, if you don't project who you are. One of the things that I think a lot of brands fail is trying to be everything to everybody. Liquid Death's like, this is who we are. You're either going to be attracted to it or you're not. But obviously, they've tapped into a lot of people who are attracted to that sort of I can't pronounce the word iconoclasm or iconoclasm. Do you know what I'm saying? Like the willingness to set aside convention. Um, and I think that's brilliant of them because they stand on something. I think brands need to stand on something, and you don't need to stand on something that appeals to everyone. It just needs to appeal to someone. And the thing that we always tell brands is like, even if you're worried about um, not appealing to the mass group by taking a side. What really happens, we find, is that if what you're standing on and who you're fighting for is aspirational, then whether or not you make a stand, you'll pull other people in because other people want to be a part of that, right? So if Liquid Death, for example, is standing for humor and creativity and we just don't care, we just don't whatever, people sometimes wish they felt that way. That may not be me. I may be a businessman, 9 to 5 with 3 kids, and I'm stressed out. But I wish I felt that way, and that gives me the ability to tap into that. So standing for something, I think, is a critical thing for all brands, and choosing who your audience is, and fighting for them will attract not only them, but it also attract other people who want to be like them.
Yeah, and I, hate to throw this like buzzword, but it's authenticity, and we talk about that a lot on this podcast. And many people have a hard time at what is authenticity, but I think you nailed it. It's knowing who you are and being unabashedly that as a brand, right? And I can't help but tie it to last night, but um, I mean,
Yeah, I was
right?
going to say the same exact thing. I was going to say the same exact thing.
like that's it, right? Whether you're that person or not, that message, they're themselves, and that resonated with people.
And I think I'm not saying that Kamala should have run a different type of campaign, but I think she definitely tried to appeal to everyone. And
Yeah,
and Trump was like, I'm a Trump and see what happens. And I I got my own opinion about that, but the point is that I do think authenticity absolutely matters today.
yeah. Damn, that's definitely a full circle moment right there.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about Japan's. I mean, the advertising landscape. You talked about it a little bit. You've been a part now. I think it's been about a decade that you've been there, right? And historically, Japan's been dominated. I think similar to the U.S. to a couple giants, Dentsu, um, Hakuhodo. Is that? Am I pronouncing that right?
No, 100% is perfect.
Okay. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you encountered, like as an independent agency? Like, I don't know the landscape there. Is it similar to the U.S. or there's smaller agencies, medium,
Yeah.
bigger? Like,
So I don't know the most recent statistics, but historically, let's say up to 5 or 7 years ago, pre-COVID numbers, the traditional Japanese agencies, your Hakuhodos, your ABKs, your Dentsus, dominate about 80% of the market. And
wow,
then you have 20%, which is everybody else, and that includes smaller Japanese agencies. That includes your international, your Ogilvies, your um, Grays, and your McCanns, and that sort of fighting for that 20%. So the slice of the pie has always been a little bit competitive in that regard. One of the things that for us though, and we're a small agency, we're about 35, 40 people right now, started in 2015. So not bad growth from that period of time, but we're still a pretty small organization. One of the things that we really focus on though is not necessarily scale, because in that sort of competitive landscape, we don't want to be the biggest agency. We're not going to do all your production and outproduce some of these larger players because they got 1,000 guys. I don't know. I could add 100 more, and we still only have 100, right? So
yeah,
we're not going to compete with that. What we really then try to focus on is in either innovative ideas or in sort of identifying solutions and companies that are really looking to partner not on the execution but on the thinking and the strategy. That's sort of where we end up focusing as a business. And I think for us it works because we're fighting for things that have an impact and quality versus the quantity, the scale, the volume of it. And ultimately I think that's still a rare proposition in Japan, in the sense that a lot of agencies are geared around, okay, great, what do you want? We service it, we make it real big. Very few agencies still in Japan, I think, our challenger agencies to the clients and says, you know what, we want to partner with you and we've got our own ideas and maybe you'll find this annoying sometimes because we'll push back. But we find that to be a value, right? And I always tell my clients, so look, I'm not in charge of anything. You are. You're the boss. We'll do whatever you say. But before we do, you have to know what we really think, because if I don't do you that service, then I haven't done my job. If you decide to go another way, that's fine. But every time you talk to me, I'm going to tell you the truth. And I think that that does give us a slightly different position amongst most agencies.
And are you working with are you like Japanese companies? Are you working in the US as well? What's your geographical range?
So we work primarily based in Japan. In Japan, we work with both Japanese companies and multinational companies based in Japan. We also have a small operation in Taiwan and also in the US. But our core hub has been Tokyo. That's where we started. And just over the last 2 years ago, we expanded to the US and this year opened up in Taiwan.
Very cool. Very cool. Congrats on your growth.
Thank
It's
you. Thank
awesome.
you. And, I really do believe this is that what we really just want to do is we want to be in positions and markets where we have an opportunity to do great innovative work. Obviously the US is one of the most innovative places there is. Like Japan is beautiful. I don't know if there's a better place in the world than Japan, but innovation happens faster sometimes in the US than it does there, right? So we want to be a part of that ecosystem. And then we're looking at broader opportunities to engage in Asia and looking at Taiwan as a hub. We have one client down there already, and we'll use that as a base to continue to grow.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and we so Think Now, we work primarily in the US, but we have a sister company, Think Now MX, based out of Mexico. Um, Culturally much more similar. Obviously, a lot of Latinos here in the US. Um, but I do love that, coming back and forth and seeing like the differences, and it's not as stark as Japan and the US, but having that perspective just helps me so much from a personal level and also from an entrepreneur. So, um, yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
think
cool.
I think to service clients or to service consumers, even you've always got to be learning new things, right? And I
Yeah,
think and I think getting outside of your comfort zone, whether that's culturally, whether that's field of expertise, is critical. And I think that as a marketer, that's immeasurable.
100%. Yeah, yeah. Because at the end of the day, right, marketers are really purveyors of culture, and like you said, it's a game, and once you know the rules, it's kind of easy to play. But once you step out and play in another game, I think it helps your game in both worlds.
And one of the things I find fascinating is that the rules change, right? Even if you just do marketing, the rules change. One of the things that I'm personally very passionate about as a marketer is the idea of storytelling, right? Like traditionally in advertising, you're doing what, 30-second commercials, whatever, and that was your story. Now, when we look at these digital touch points, and a lot of people then look at digital touch points as sort of fragmented experiences, well, how do you link that to a story? Because when a consumer understands a story, regardless of whether you're going over their app or to the website or to, maybe a offline touch point, but bringing that all together with a holistic story about what the brand is, I think is so critical. And I think as the game changes, how do you apply a skill that we used to master in storytelling to a brand new medium? Is such a great thing. And I think as an industry, sometimes we're still evolving in that way.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to the next question I wanted to ask. I think one of the ways, of course, I'm biased though, but like is data, right? That we can better tailor that experience. And you mentioned a little bit about companies in Japan embracing that, maybe a little bit slower pace than the US. But how do you help clients navigate, data driven marketing? Like what's your hypothesis or perspective on that?
So I'll tell you my answer is really simple. I don't care about data. And what I
Okay.
mean by that is like I'm a data guy. I spent a few years at American Express in their analytics team. I've worked with data a large part of my career. I love data. I'm not a data guy. I mean, I don't care. I don't care about data. And what I mean by that, I care about what data answers. Because I think so many people get intimidated. So many of our clients or whomever get intimidated by data. What does this mean? What's that technique? And what did the model produce? And all these things. I think the question is what business problem do you have, and how do you find answers through data on it? But you keep it real simple. It's a question that needs to be solved, and then you mine for answers, right? And I think that's where we try to guide our clients to say, look, don't worry about the data. Actually, let's focus on the questions. Let's focus on the problems. And then I can tell you how we can start to answer those for you through this technique or that technique. That's fine. But the data is actually not that important. The questions are so much more important. And then we go interrogate the data, see if we can get you some answers. I think, I think, especially with technology, people get so lost in the technique or the methodology or the new system or the new algorithm that they forget the question. And that's where it starts. And if we can just master those, the other part's easy.
I love that. Yeah, no, that's so true, right? And I think it's such an American thing to be obsessed with data, like getting as much as you can of it. You know, as an entrepreneur, it's like, oh, I got to get data. It's got to be a data-driven business. But at the end of the day, you're just trying to answer a question. That's
Yeah. And
yeah,
how many times have you seen people collect a lot of data and don't know how to use any of it because they haven't defined a question, but now you're storing this, you're wondering about this, some of it's no longer useful, and you're trying to figure it out because you don't have any questions that data is focused on.
yeah, yeah. No, that's great. One thing, I mean, we're almost coming up at the end, but I did want to save a little bit of time talking about your entrepreneurial journey. I mean, I think
Yeah,
it's
sure.
impressive. I mean, you launched a company in Japan as an American. Like that's tough. I mean, we launched a company in Mexico, but I'm Mexican American. I speak the language, so there's some connection there. Um, what's the biggest challenge you face, like scaling internationally? What and yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
I think well, first off, I think Japan's a pretty good market to start a company. Like only because there's a couple of real things that I think make Japan a positive place to start a company. Administratively, it's not that hard, provided you have whatever capital or and you've been there and you have whatever visa in place. It's not that hard administratively to set up a company. The other part is that I really find that there's a integrity to doing business in Japan that you're not really worried about being ripped off.
Mm,
People, if they say they're going to do something, they pretty much do it. If a contract's going to say this, your client's pretty much going to deliver that. They say they're going to pay on this day, we'll pay on that day. So a lot of the
wow.
a lot of the variability that comes sometimes in doing business in other cultures isn't there where you're like, well, I did the work and you keep calling the guy, chasing them to get paid and things like that. It doesn't really happen in Japan in the same sort of way, which is really nice because you have a culture of doing business where basically people keep their word. Um, I think the hardest part ultimately about being doing business in Japan is again I think Japan is it's a multi-layered sort of society where you have to make progress through the layers and that comes through time. So a lot of business is done through networking and through relationships and through trust. And it takes time to build those sort of networks in a way that doesn't in the US per se. Like if you're in the US, I got a bright idea, you keep chasing the right people, someone will give you a listen. In Japan, you have to earn credibility at a more sustained level where I know you, someone I really know trusts you. And that takes longer to do in that context. So the journey to growth sometimes can be a little slower. But on the flip side, you also have more dependability. So I personally feel very fortunate to have been able to start a company in Japan, to be able to now take that company and expand it into other markets, because I think it's just it is a really good place for me.
That's cool. I never even thought about some things that I mean, again, right? Just I'm playing in this game, but like in America, there's a whole industry built around someone chasing your invoices to get paid for you.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
as a
The work's
small
already done.
business, yeah, like it's insane, right? And what's crazy here is ironically, the small to medium sized businesses are the ones that get paid the latest because they know the big companies can push you around, you know?
No, absolutely, and it's just it's an interesting way of doing business. But I think I think the U.S. can also be the upside in the U.S. is that it's more dynamic. It's easier sometimes to break through with good ideas or good work. The downside is you have to chase invoices. You know.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, a little bit about that, like your team. So, tell us a little bit about building a diverse team. Like I'm assuming you have employees in Japan, Taiwan, US. How do you bridge those cultural gaps?
Look, it's interesting. We had a conversation the other day around cultural gaps within ages because we have people like literally probably 12 different native languages are spoken. Like we've got people from India, Ukraine, Vietnam, Philippines, wherever, America. So you have a very diverse team, and everyone has their own perspective of how things can be done, right? Um, One of the things that I think is really important that we were talking about internally with our team is that look, the culture of any place is not as important as the culture of relative, right? The culture of us as a company. And what we focus on fundamentally, those principles about relationship design, these are not things that you can just tell a client or you can try to build for consumers. You have to live it first as a company. So how we treat each other, how we respect each other, how we collaborate with each other, how we create safe spaces for each other is the foundation of what we do. We cannot encourage a brand to do that for its consumers if we don't do that for our team and for our teammates. So that's really the focus, and that's really what we emphasize. It's how we, when we do evaluations, that's part of the consideration about how we build, how you individually build and support and sustain that culture. That culture is just way more important than anything else. Because as I said in the very beginning, we as an agency can't do great work unless we're creating a place where people feel supported, safe, etc. So that's the basis. And I think fortunately, maybe it's, a bit of luck, maybe it's good hiring practices. We've got people who really embrace that. And so I think we're able to have that positive multicultural culture where people are happy with our differences and happy to collaborate to produce better outcomes.
I love that. I'm gonna be frank. I'm gonna steal that because I feel like we have that, right? Like, we're fiercely protective of our culture, as a company, and similarly, we don't have as many companies representative, but we're all across Latin America and India, and the U.S. Interestingly, I mean, I think in this journey, personally, in entrepreneurship, I've just seen so many more similarities between Asian and Latin American culture. That's great to see, um, and being able to visit India and bring some of our Indian employees to Latin America has been awesome. But yeah, I love that centering your company's culture, and this is in a way it's its own country, and let's follow these rules here, right?
Absolutely. And also again, trying to model that for how we then work with our clients. So that this idea of relationships as a principle has to be something we live, therefore we can sell it, therefore we can deliver it. Failure to live it means that it's just nothing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, really appreciate the conversation today. This was a great convo. I needed it. I feel positive. I feel good after that. So, your insights in marketing and relationship design, it's all awesome. So, to our listeners, please check out Cairo, his work at Relative. You want to share the website link here? Have you?
The website's very simple. It's just relativ.com, relative.com. You can from there you can find our links to Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever you're looking for. And obviously welcome any sort of feedback, discussions, and conversations.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And as always, thanks for tuning in to the New Mainstream Podcast.
And thank you, Mario.
Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform.